there's a lot going on that's evil. Mm-hmm. There's good and there's evil, and it's real. And there's this weird battle going on with human beings. And I think that battle almost has to take place to motivate people to be better.
You think that's where there's war, cyclical war?
There's no reason why it should exist today. There's no reason why, as educated as we are in history, that we should be willing as a people, as groups of people, to ever invade other places to steal their resources. There's no way we should be doing that. At this point, with the kind of communication that human beings have with each other around the world, there should be a way to reasonably communicate and share goods and ideas and compete and take part in each other's commerce. I sell to you, you sell to me, everybody gets along. Mm-hmm. This should be totally doable in 2024. The fact that it's not and that no one thinks it's ever going to be is what's terrifying about being a person. Because that's the thing that keeps you up at night. The thing, like, if one of these fucking assholes, one of these greedy cocksuckers that's under the boot of the military-industrial complex decides to push it a little too far, and someone decides to shoot a nuke off, mm-hmm. and then we're in this new thing where cities could just disappear. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not just a September 11th where 2 buildings disappeared and a bunch of people died and it's a horrible tragedy. No, the whole city gone. Mm-hmm. Boom. One city down. Now, shut the fuck up or we'll bomb all your cities. You know, it's going to wipe out who knows how many different species. I mean, it's going to kill everything. And even the people that are left over, what are you left with? Whatever 2 billion people that still survive, where and what?
We can see not only is nuclear winter what was thought in the 80s, it's actually much worse. So whereby originally they thought there would be a year of ice sheets across large bodies of water from Iowa to Ukraine, across the mid-latitudes of the globe. Now that could be up to 7 or 10 years. So think about that much frozen land for that long. You have the death of agriculture. You have like you are talking about, you have the complete disruption of the ability for people to grow food and eat food. I take you through what this is like in detail because it's so bizarre to think about that you have a man-made problem, nuclear weapons, and yet people are not paying attention to the fact that whatever is created by man essentially would theoretically have a man-made solution.
So you can see quickly how this thing is spiraling so out of control and increasing these tensions between our two countries, not being done in a way that to me is strategic, providing us with the certainty of that path forward to reach a specific objective of correcting this trade imbalance, which is how this whole thing began.
Why do you think he's doing that? Why would he make a tweet like that?
It's hard to explain because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't actually serve us and our interests of our economic interests of meeting that objective. I don't know if he thinks this is part of his masterful, negotiation skills, but it's got a very dangerous effect. And the fact that we have nuclear strategists in this country who remind us that we are at a greater risk of nuclear war now than ever before, it's because of these kinds of things that are increasing tensions between the United States and China, other things that are increasing the tensions between the United States and Russia, a country where we still have nuclear missiles pointed at each other that can be set off at a moment's notice, literally leaving us as people with just minutes before a nuclear holocaust, a nuclear disaster, nuclear war.
Although the results of a nuclear war would be very much like an asteroid striking the United States, or the world, anywhere, there's a solution to nuclear war. There's a solution called disarmament. We have a total of 12,200 and some odd nuclear weapons.
And is the concern that if we did that, other countries would not do that and we would be defenseless?
Yeah. Absolutely. But, things happen in sort of inches and feet. They don't have to happen overnight. Once upon a time, there were 70,000 nuclear warheads in 1986.
Oh, so we're making progress.
We were making progress until this past year. And these treaties are all, at risk, and people are just very busy seeing everybody else as the enemy.
This past year specifically because of what?
Well, Putin's saying he's not going to be involved in the treaty anymore. Donald Trump said he pulled us out of the treaty. So there's leaders are threatening this is all on the table right now. It could and should be looked at. But do you remember back when we were in high school when Reagan and Gorbachev got together for the Reykjavik summit?
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
That was the beginning of a movement toward disarmament.
He's just a brilliant scientist. He's not supposed to be the guy who destroys 500,000 people in one moment, one brief flash of light, and vaporizes 500,000 people.
He went to this school in New York City called the Ethical Culture Fieldston School, which is where my kids went. So Oppenheimer is kind of a patron saint for having the brains to do something almost unimaginable and having the ethics and courage to know that what he'd done was unacceptable on some levels.
Yeah.
On the other hand, but look, if we're talking about costs and benefits, let's think about nuclear power, nuclear bombs as a deterrent against others down the road, right? So you have to say, killed a lot of people. How many lives did it save? Impossible to say.
You sound like a Republican, sir.
I know, but I mean,
That's the argument, right?
Then you also have to talk about, then let's also talk about nuclear power, which was the byproduct of this, right? And there are those who could argue, and I would probably aid this argument to say that if the U.S. had continued on the path of nuclear power in the 70s rather than totally flipping out after 3 Mile Island, then later Chernobyl, which was a much worse accident than 3 Mile Island. If that had continued, what we'd have now is probably much cleaner, cheaper, safer nuclear fuel.
Wait a minute, 70,000 nuclear weapons is just an accident waiting to happen. And so we are at 12,500 today because of that.
And we should also say that there have been some very close calls.
The Secretary General said last year or something, we are one misunderstanding, one miscommunication away from nuclear annihilation. He's not kidding.
There was this one incident where the Soviet Union thought that we were attacking them, and there was one guy who resisted launching a counterstrike. And that one guy prevented nuclear annihilation. One guy said, I think this is an error. This doesn't make sense. I'm not doing this. And that one guy saved us. I don't remember what the incident was. What do you remember?
Yeah.
What was the exact issue?
So his name was Petrov, and it was in 1983. So what's even more remarkable about him is this was at a time of, absolute animosity, enmity between the two nations. It was a really precarious time in the world. And Petrov was in a early warning radar system, outside of Moscow, that reads data of possible incoming nuclear missiles. And he saw what the radar screen, the radar scope was reading as 5 ICBMs coming from Wyoming. 5. He knew that we would send 1,000 missiles if we were going to launch. And so he questioned the data, which is just so remarkable in its own conception when you think about that. He questioned it, and he didn't send it up the chain of command as a missile attack.
If our ideas that we've been discussing are incorrect, if our assumptions were incorrect, it's a value judgment against us.
Right.
I think the nuclear thing is interesting because I think one of the problems with what happened was the shitty design of Fukushima, where they can't shut it off. It's freaked people out, rightly so.
And it's built in a bad spot.
It's
plainly.
a terrible spot.
Yeah.
And the backup plans sucked. Everything's wrong. And now they have this nuclear hotspot that it's going to be like that for 100,000 years.
Right.
There's a better way, and they never had a chance to find that better way because they've had a better way for everything else. And the later runs, the ones that they're operational now, are far better than the Fukushima one. And they could have gotten way, 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 way better. And it's one of those things that doesn't seem like it make sense. Like, wait a minute, nuclear's clean?
Right.
It's fucking really clean. It's really clean if it's done right. And if they allowed them to innovate over those 40 years, we would have got to some place where it's like super efficient, just like everything else. If you look at a 1970 car, right, and then you look at a car from 2020, how about a Tesla?
Yeah.
0 emissions.
Right.
Like, maybe they would figure out how to really knock it down to something
there
incredibly-
are still a lot of people working on next generation nuclear power, including Bill Gates is involved in, and including some that are working with using as fuel what's called spent fuel in a traditional nuclear reactor, which takes care of 2 big problems at once.
Right.
So, look,
they have,
reasons
like,
to be cheerful.
Now your power doesn't work anymore. Oh no, where do you get your ice? Well, you better go back to the old ways and get a fucking ice pit because you don't have electricity anymore. That's not hard to do. Like, someone could take out our electrical grid pretty fucking easy. And these assholes that are in charge of the world in all countries that are still playing this fucking game of maybe we'll kill you all.
Yeah, it's like a big game of chicken, and there's no, like, when we were kids, I don't know if this happened in your school, but like, we had drills. We had nuclear war drills. And like, it was a day-to-day existential worry that people didn't sleep because of nukes. Those same fucking nukes are tenfold today in terms of the arsenals.
And way more people have them.
Way more countries have them. And there's way more, when you look at what's going on in the Middle East, like, that is a fucking, that is going to explode at some point, and it's going to happen fast because there's all these alliances where if one country does it, 8 others are going to do it the same day.
Peter Thiel was talking about that it's the ultimate dilemma when it comes to nuclear power, because nuclear power is more efficient than other power, and it's actually greener. It's probably safer for the environment, especially with the kind of nuclear reactors they're capable of building and designing today. But they didn't realize that if you give someone nuclear power, it's really easy to turn that into nuclear weapons. They thought it was a lot harder than it was, and they did it for India. And he was saying then they realized, like, India got the nuclear weapon. And it's like, oh. Okay, so now we can't just give everybody nuclear power, because then you have everybody has nuclear weapons. And what if it's some fucking warlord who's on amphetamines in the middle of the Congo and he decides he's going to nuke his neighbor?
Yeah.
You know, people can get crazy.
We have a system in space, a satellite system called SBIRS, Space-Based Infrared Satellite System. It's like the Paul Revere of the 21st century. It is parked over our enemies that have nuclear weapons, and it can see and detect a nuclear launch of an ICBM in a fraction of a second, Joe. Confirmed fact. That's why nuclear war begins and ends in 72 minutes, because the SBIRS satellite system sees the launch, and then the U.S. Nuclear Command and Control goes begins. And by the way, an ICBM cannot be redirected and it cannot be recalled.
What about these hypersonic weapons that can adjust their trajectory? They can move to different places. Like, they look like it's going to Arizona and it goes to Chicago.
So ballistic missiles are hypersonic. So a little bit of a misnomer there. And also a hypersonic missile, let's just say it went from Russia to the United States, it might take an hour. A ballistic missile launched from a launch pad outside Moscow takes 26 minutes and 40 seconds to get to Washington, D.C. That number's not going to change. That's gravity, that's physics. That's what it was in 1958, 59, and that's what it is today.
But isn't the new technology that it can alter its course?
Yes, but so if you go with that logic and you say, well, it can move around, so it would be harder to shoot down.
Right.
As I explain in the book, and again, as was relayed to me by defense officials, we can't shoot down ballistic missiles, long-range ballistic missiles, with any kind of certainty or accuracy.
It's not like the Iron Dome or anything like that.
The Iron Dome is almost like terrible for nuclear war, for people to understand how dangerous nuclear war is, because the Iron Dome can shoot down short-range missiles and mid-range missiles. So even the U.S. Aegis systems out on the sea, the Navy systems, shot down some of those Iranian drones.
North Korea, man. Once North Korea has it, it's a fucking...
They have it.
Do they?
Yes, North Korea has nukes.
No shit.
Yes. Yeah,
they don't
nukes.
have the long-range delivery systems
They
yet.
say they do now.
Yeah.
Who knows? But there was a famous nuclear bomb that went off that they kind of denied in North Korea a while back. What was that? They think it might have been an accident. It's hard to tell, because North Korea is pretty tight with their propaganda. But I remember there was some nuclear detonation was detected in the mountains, and they were trying to figure out if it was on purpose or if it was an underground thing, because they do underground nukes too, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Just may trigger an earthquake, but let's find out.
Yeah.
Let's just detonate a nuke a mile under the surface of the earth. Fucking psychopaths.
Well, we did it in Oklahoma in I guess it was like maybe the 50s or 60s.
Yeah.
And they didn't tell people to leave the neighboring towns, and there's all these people. The cancer rates were through the roof.
Here it says, comprehensive test ban treaty has been detected seismic activity in more than 24 stations around the world, confirming that man-made explosions have occurred near North Korea's nuclear testing sites. For example, in 2016, the CTBTO detected a 4.85 magnitude seismic event, which North Korea claimed was a hydrogen bomb test.
They are not saying, okay, well, because we're doing this, we're going to invest not just trillions, but hundreds or thousands of trillions of dollars to make sure that every single American in this country has a nuclear bunker within 10 minutes of their home or their place of work or their school. Because that's how much time we'd have. That's what we would need in order to deal with the consequences of the decisions that they're making and the failed leadership that they're providing. And so this is an issue that I'm raising awareness about because of what's at risk. I mean, this is the greatest threat that we face. And it requires strong leadership to walk us away from this brink of nuclear war, to be able to work with other countries based on cooperation rather than conflict, de-escalate these tensions, work out our differences, and walk us back from the brink. Stop this nuclear arms race that's making us and the world less safe.
I think part of the reason why nuclear war is not spoken about in the general public is because it's set up to be intimidating. You'll hear a lot of defense people and analysts using very esoteric language, and it kind of excludes the average Joe or Annie. So I ask really basic questions like, how does a ballistic missile work? And it's very simple. That 26 minutes and 40 seconds I told you about. So there's 3 phases of a ballistic missile. It launches, it has boost phase. First 5 minutes, imagine a rocket. You've seen launches. That fire coming out the bottom. That boosts the rocket for 5 minutes. That's when it's detectable from space. Then it enters mid-course phase, which is going to be 20 minutes, arcing across the globe to its target. That is the only place where the interceptor missile can get it, if it can. And it's 500 miles up. And it's traveling at something like Mach 23, 14,000 miles an hour. Okay, so that's 20 minutes. And then the last phase is called terminal phase, appropriately so, 100 seconds, when the nuclear warhead re-enters the atmosphere, boom, explodes over its target. The interceptor system is designed to take out the missile in mid-course phase. So we have 44 interceptors. Remember I told you we have 1,700, let's say, nuclear missiles on ready for launch status. Russia has about the same. We have 44 interceptor missiles. How are 44 interceptor missiles going to go up against more than 1,000 Russian nuclear weapons coming at us? Never mind the fact that each interceptor has a 50% shoot-down rate. And that's by the Missile Defense Agency spokesperson. So there's this perception that we have a system like the Iron Dome that could take out these incoming missiles, and we simply don't.
If you threaten a country's economy and their economic security, where does that logically lead? You threaten their ability to provide for their people. You threaten their ability to provide that stable environment, which China, so much of what they do is just like, hey, they look for that stability. What other recourse is there other than the threat of military force? And in this case, when you're dealing with two nuclear-armed countries, this is what's at risk. And it's something, it's hard for a lot of people to conceive of, like, okay, my gosh, nuclear war, really? I mean, this is something that, back during the Cold War with the kids going under their desk, these drills and okay, where do you go find a bunker? But this is something that's a reality that we're facing today. And it's something that, we in Hawaii in January of last year went through with that missile alert.
Yeah. That was
that
crazy.
It was terrifying.
A fake missile alert, nuclear weapons on its way.
Right. Missile inbound towards Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. That was the message that was blasted out to over 1 million phones all across our state, on the radio, scrolling across the television, and people immediately like, seek immediate shelter. Okay, where do I go? Where do I take my kids? Where do I take my family? They had college kids sprinting across campus at the University of Hawaii trying to find shelter. It says seek immediate shelter. But the sick insanity of all of this is that there is no shelter.
In a story that reads more like fiction than real life, nuclear scientists discovered that there was a difference in the amount of uranium they were processing. It was the kind of joke that should never be pulled. And here is how it went. In June 1972, nuclear scientists at a uranium enrichment plant in Pierre-Latte, southeast France, noticed a strange deficit in the amount of uranium-235 they were processing. This was a severe problem in a uranium enrichment plant, where every gram of fissionable material had to be carefully accounted for. The problem was in the ratio of uranium isotopes in their samples. Natural uranium contains 3 isotopes, always in the same ratios. Uranium-238, 99.92744%, uranium-235, 0.7202%, and uranium-234, 0.044%. The problem was with the uranium-235, of which there was only 0.600%. Further analyses showed that ore from at least one part of the mine was far short on uranium-235. It was calculated that some 200 kilograms appeared to be missing, enough to make half a dozen or so nuclear bombs. An investigation was immediately carried out to trace the problem and account for the deficit. Physicists soon traced the anomaly to the supply of uranium ore from Gabon in West Africa. The supply contained far less uranium-235 than the ore from anywhere else on the planet, a problem that caused some serious worry among nuclear scientists. Thus, France's top nuclear scientists began an investigation, and in the process, made one of the most remarkable discoveries in recent history. This kind of depleted uranium is only found inside nuclear reactors, which burn uranium-235. The discovery set off a hunt for a reactor that could have produced this stuff. On 25th of September 1972, the scientists announced that the depleted uranium had come from Gabon, where nuclear scientists had discovered a 2-billion-year-old nuclear reactor at the site of the Oklo uranium mines, near a town called Franceville. The site was a naturally occurring deposit of uranium, where the concentration of uranium-235 had been high enough to trigger a self-sustaining nuclear reaction. Since its discovery, the Oklo reactor has been a significant driver of important research in nuclear physics. In particular, physicists have used it to study how buried nuclear waste might spread through the environment. And since the reactor began operating some 2 billion years ago, they have also used it to examine how the universe's fundamental constants may have changed during that time. But the first puzzle that physicists had to deal with in 1972 was how a naturally occurring reactor could work at all. It is well known among nuclear scientists that reactors do not work with natural uranium because the level of uranium-235 is too low at only 0.72%. Instead, the uranium-235 has to be enriched so that it is about 3.5% of the total. So how did so much end up at Oklo? The answer to this puzzle is that uranium-235 has a shorter half-life than other uranium isotopes, and so it would have been present in much higher quantities in the Earth's distant past. When the solar system was created, for example, about 17% of uranium would have been the 235 isotope. that percentage has fallen steadily since then. When the ore in Gabon was laid down some 2 billion years ago, the concentration of uranium-235 would have been about 4%, more than enough for a self-sustaining nuclear reaction. The idea is that when a neutron hits an atom of uranium-235, the atom splits, producing 2 smaller nuclei and several neutrons. These neutrons go on to split other atoms in an ongoing chain reaction. However, the liberated neutrons are high-energy particles that tend to fly away rapidly. So nuclear reactors usually contain a moderating material that slows down the neutrons so that they can interact with other uranium atoms. It turns out that water is a reasonable neutron moderator. So, an essential component of this natural reactor was the presence of water seeping through the uranium ore, and this had an interesting impact on the way the reactors operated. Nuclear scientists believe that the Oklo reactors operated in pulses. As water flowed into the rock, it moderated the neutrons, allowing a chain reaction to occur. But this increased the temperature of the rock, boiling the water into steam, which escaped. When all this happened, the neutrons could no longer interact with and split uranium nuclei, and the chain reaction stopped. The rock then cooled, allowing water to flow back in, so the Oklo reactors operated in pulses. Today, nuclear scientists have calculated that the chain reaction probably lasted 30 minutes and then switched off for about 2.5 hours, a pulsing process that continued for about 300,000 years. While they were on, the reactors were powerful devices. Scientists estimate that the reactors likely operated under conditions similar to present-day pressurized water reactor systems, with pressures of about 150 atmospheres and temperatures of about 300 degrees Celsius. After the initial observation by scientists, specialists at the French Atomic Energy Commission remained perplexed for weeks. The answer only came when someone recalled a prediction published 19 years earlier. In 1953, George W. Wetherill of the University of California at Los Angeles and Mark G. Ingram of the University of Chicago pointed out that some uranium deposits might have once operated as natural versions of the nuclear fission reactors that were then becoming popular. Shortly after that, Paul K. Kuroda, a chemist from the University of Arkansas, calculated what it would take for a uranium ore body to undergo self-sustained fission spontaneously. In this process, a stray neutron causes a uranium-235 nucleus to split, which gives off more neutrons, causing others of these atoms to break apart in a nuclear chain reaction. Kuroda's first condition was that the size of the uranium deposit should exceed the average length that fission-inducing neutrons travel, about 2/3 of a meter. This requirement helps to ensure that the neutrons given off by one fissioning nucleus are absorbed by another before escaping from the uranium vein. A second prerequisite is that uranium-235 must be present in sufficient quantity. Today, even the most massive and concentrated uranium deposit cannot become a nuclear reactor because, at less than 1%, the uranium-235 concentration is just too low. But this isotope is radioactive and decays about 6 times faster than uranium-238, which indicates that the fissile fraction was much higher in the distant past. The third important ingredient is a neutron moderator, a substance that can slow the neutrons given off when a uranium nucleus splits, so that the neurons are more apt to induce other uranium nuclei to break apart. Finally, there should be no significant amounts of boron, lithium, or other so-called poisons that absorb neutrons and would thus bring any nuclear reaction to a swift halt. Amazingly, the actual conditions that prevailed 2 billion years ago in what researchers eventually determined to be 16 separate areas within the Oklo and adjacent Okolobando uranium mines were very close to what Kuroda outlined. Physicists confirmed the basic idea that natural fission reactions were responsible for the depletion of uranium-235 at Oklo quite soon after the anomalous uranium was discovered. Indisputable proof came from an examination of the new, lighter elements created when a heavy nucleus is broken in two. The quantity of these fission products proved so high that no other conclusion could be drawn. A nuclear chain reaction, very much like the one that Enrico Fermi and his colleagues famously demonstrated in 1942, had certainly taken place, all on its own, and some 2 billion years before. Shortly after this astonishing discovery, physicists from around the world studied the evidence for these natural nuclear reactors. They came together to share their work on the Oklo phenomenon at a special 1975 conference held in Libreville, the capital of Gabon. The following year, George A. Cowan, who represented the U.S. at that conference, and who, incidentally, is one of the founders of the renowned Santa Fe Institute, wrote an article for Scientific American. In the article, he explained what scientists had surmised about the operation of these ancient reactors. Cowan described, for example, how some of the neutrons released during the fission of uranium-235 were captured by the more abundant uranium-238, which became uranium-239, and, after emitting 2 electrons, turned into plutonium-239. More than 2 tons of this plutonium isotope were generated within the Oklo deposit. Although almost all this material, which has a 24,000-year half-life, has since disappeared, primarily through natural radioactive decay, some of the plutonium itself underwent fission, as attested by the presence of its characteristic fission products. The abundance of those lighter elements allowed scientists to deduce that fission reactions must have gone on for hundreds of thousands of years. For many scientists, it is astonishing that more than a dozen natural reactors spontaneously sprang into existence and managed to maintain a modest power output for perhaps a few hundred millennia. But beyond the initial surprise, some questions began to float almost immediately. Why is it that these parts of the deposit did not explode and destroy themselves right after nuclear chain reactions began? What mechanism provided the necessary self-regulation, and did these reactors run steadily or in fits and starts? The solutions to these puzzles emerged slowly after the initial discovery of the Oklo phenomenon. Indeed, the last question about the pace of the reactors lingered for more than 3 decades before some scientists at Washington University in St. Louis began to address it by examining a piece of the ore. Their work on one of the Oklo reactors centered on an analysis of xenon, a heavy inert gas that can remain imprisoned within minerals for billions of years. Xenon possesses 9 stable isotopes produced in various proportions by different nuclear processes. Being a noble gas, it resists chemical bonding with other elements and is thus easy to purify for isotopic analysis. Xenon is extremely rare, which allows scientists to use it to detect and trace nuclear reactions, even those that occurred in primitive meteorites before the solar system came into existence. To analyze the isotopic composition of xenon requires a mass spectrometer, an instrument that can separate atoms according to their atomic weight. However, to glean greater information about the genesis and retention of this gas, the scientists adopted a more delicate approach called laser extraction, which releases xenon selectively from a single mineral grain, leaving adjacent areas intact. This technique was then applied to many tiny spots on the one available fragment of Oklo rock, which was only 1 millimeter thick and 4 millimeters across. After each extraction, they purified the resulting gas and passed the xenon into Hohenberg's mass spectrometer, which indicated the number of atoms of each isotope present. The first surprise was the location of the xenon. Contrary to their expectations, it was not found to a significant extent in the uranium-rich mineral grains. Rather, the lion's share was trapped in aluminum phosphate minerals, which contain no uranium at all. Remarkably, these grains showed the highest concentration of xenon ever found in any natural material. The second surprise was that the extracted gas had a significantly different isotopic makeup from what is usually produced in nuclear reactors. It had seemingly lost a large portion of the xenon 136 and 134 that would certainly have been created from fission, whereas the lighter varieties of the element were modified to a lesser extent. For them, understanding the strange composition of xenon came only after they thought harder about how this gas was born. None of the xenon isotopes they measured were the direct result of uranium fission, Rather, they were the products of the decay of radioactive isotopes of iodine, which in turn were formed from radioactive tellurium and so forth, according to a well-known sequence of nuclear reactions that gives rise to stable xenon. The key insight was the realization that different xenon isotopes in their Oklo sample were created at different times, following a schedule that depended on the half-lives of their iodine parents and tellurium grandparents. The longer a particular radioactive precursor lives, the longer its xenon formation is held off. For example, production of xenon-136 began at Oklo only about a minute after the onset of self-sustained fission. An hour later, the next lighter stable isotope, xenon-134, appeared. Then, some days after the start of fission, xenon-132 and 131 came on the scene. Finally, after millions of years, and well after the nuclear chain reactions terminated, xenon-129 formed. According to the scientists, it is not entirely obvious what forces kept this xenon inside the aluminum phosphate minerals for almost half the planet's lifetime. The question was, why was the xenon generated during a given operational pulse not driven off during the next one? Presumably, it became imprisoned in the cage-like structure of the aluminum phosphate minerals, which were able to hold on to the xenon gas created within them, even at high temperatures. The details remain fuzzy, but whatever the final answers are, one thing is clear. The capacity of aluminum phosphate for capturing xenon is truly amazing. According to a report released on the subject, we had worked out in a general way how the observed set of xenon isotopes was created inside the aluminum phosphate grains. We attempted to model the process mathematically. This exercise revealed much about the timing of reactor operation, with all xenon isotopes providing pretty much the same answer. This pattern of on and off is similar to what we see in some geysers, which slowly heat up, boil off their supply of groundwater in a spectacular display, refill, and repeat the cycle, day in and day out, year after year. This similarity supports the notion that the groundwater passing through the Oklo deposit was a neutron moderator, and that its boiling away at times accounted for the self-regulation that protected these natural reactors from destruction. In this regard, it was extremely effective, not allowing a single meltdown or explosion for hundreds of thousands of years. Later, French nuclear scientists carried out a detailed survey of the Oklo site, discovering not just one reactor zone, but up to 17 of them over several tens of square kilometers. Some of these were close to the surface and had been influenced by weathering processes, while others were at depths of up to 400 meters and were more or less pristine. In addition to the depleted uranium-235, these zones contained numerous fission fragments, such as isotopes of zirconium, yttrium, neodymium, and cerium. The unusual ratios of these isotopes were a vital indicator of what had gone on there almost 2 billion years earlier. The presence of these fission byproducts immediately piqued the interest of nuclear scientists, particularly in the US. One of the biggest challenges facing the nuclear industry is to find a way to deal with the highly radioactive waste that reactors produce. One idea is to bury it, but that raises the question of what would happen to this waste over the millions of years, during which it remains toxic. The Oklo reactors were a natural test of this question, so US scientists in particular began a program to measure the way in which different fission products migrated away from the reactor zones. According to a scientist, one of the most important and surprising early findings was that uranium and most of the rare earth elements did not experience significant mobilization in the past 2 billion years. Because the wastes were contained successfully in Oklo, it appears not unrealistic to hope that long-term disposal in specially selected and engineered geological repositories can be successful. This evidence has since become one of the main arguments in favor of nuclear waste repositories, such as the one planned at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. Oklo has also become the focus of physicists studying the possibility that the universe's fundamental constants may have changed over time. The reason that Oklo may be able to help is that it stopped operating over 1.5 billion years ago. So, the nuclear processes that occurred at that time must have been governed by the fundamental constants as they were then. In particular, physicists are interested in the fine structure constant, which determines the strength of the electromagnetic interaction. This, in turn, determines the way neutrons are absorbed in chain reactions, and consequently, the yields of different fission products. The focus of most research has been on the amount of samarium-149 produced by these natural reactors. The data places bounds on how much the constant may have changed in the past. The consensus is that the data is consistent with the fine structure constant being actually constant, although it doesn't rule out tiny changes. No other natural reactors have been discovered anywhere on Earth, making Oklo unique, at least for the moment. Thanks for watching another episode of Voyager. While you're still here, make sure to click the video on your screen for more mind-blowing videos about space.